Good afternoon, saints. Well, the Lord gave me another little, if you want to say, a confirmation passage about when the day of the Lord starts, and I thought, wow, that's a couple here in a week or so. And as I was thinking about this, um, the whole notion of the rapture occurring, and then a gap between then and the day of the Lord starting, um, I thought was getting to be a topic that was at least 3 to 4 years old now. And I wasn't sure if people had joined my channel since then, if they'd even understand what we're talking about here. So I thought, given this next little nugget that I got here this morning, that I'd go back and I'd kind of recap the whole story and just leave it for you to do your own Bible study. I'm gonna go through my notes here on the right, and it's got all the passage references, so you can kind of track this or screen snapshot it if you want to go track these down for yourself. But the general argument and the general thing that I'm following through in this one is that the day of the Lord doesn't necessarily begin at the rapture of the church. It doesn't necessarily begin with the opening of the seals in Revelation 6. Matter of fact, I think we're going to make an argument here that's pretty powerful. It says the seals are the build-up to the day of the Lord. And I think in a sense that you can kind of do this from reason as well, because the seals are said to be opening the title deed to earth, the reclaiming of earth. Satan's been the usurper and been in control since he tricked Adam and Eve. And the judgment here ends with Jesus on the throne in Jerusalem, the millennial reign, reclaiming the earth for him, restoring the earth, restoring the fall. And so that's the purpose. And if the opening of the seals of the scroll is opening the seals on the title deed of earth, that reclaiming of the earth, if you think just in human sense of, the title has to be open to verify what the contract said. So the opening of the seals, just in a logical sense, isn't necessarily part of the reclaiming. It's the birth pangs coming into the reclaiming of the earth is, and I guess, a way or an analogy we can talk about. But just demonstrating maybe this gap and why the day of the Lord itself, the 7-year tribulation period, doesn't happen concurrent with the rapture. Let's go build that argument and come back through the different points that can be made that sort of demonstrate this, and again, leave it for your own study. But the first notion is it's a pre-tribulation rapture scenario, and I know there's some people just frustrated with that because it's taught against so vehemently by several prominent people and a whole bunch of YouTubers that have picked up on it. And so if you're not open to that, click off on the video now, because this would only frustrate you. But in Revelation 4 verse 1, John is told to come up here and I will show you the things, right? And the coming up is a prototype of the rapture of the church. We see that in 1 Thessalonians 4. And so that's the model. The rapture of the church occurs, and Revelation is written in order. So chapter 4 comes before chapter 6. And so the church pictured in heaven, the elders, they're in Revelation 4, and in Revelation 5 is the picture of that. And then in 6, the seals begin to open. And so there's a gap, though, and we're going to make that argument between that rapture of the church and the 7-year tribulation period, or what's called the day of the Lord in both the Old and New Testament. And so that's what we're digging into if you haven't been part of this argument. I'm going to just start with Daniel 9:27, because that's kind of the basis of the 7-year tribulation period. Daniel's given this prophecy. He's told that there's going to be 70 weeks decreed concerning your people, the Israelites, in your holy city, Jerusalem. And it goes on to restrain transgression, put an end to sin, make atonement for lawlessness, to establish everlasting righteousness, and to conclude vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy place. Restore the temple, or what's called the millennial temple. They'll be there, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, everlasting righteousness. And so 70 weeks, and the last week, he describes 69 of the weeks here and what's going to happen, including that the anointed one, the Messiah, will be cut off and have no successor. So he's put to death. So that happened. And then the 70th week, you get this. He will make a binding covenant with many for a week. Now, if you track this, the antecedent here is this guy here. Then the people, the coming commander, will destroy both the city and sanctuary. Its ending will be with a flood. Now, that happened, in 70 AD. The Roman emperor Vespasian told his son Titus, who had the Roman troops outside of Jerusalem about to sack it because of their rebellion. The people of the coming commander will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And so that's where you get the notion of this Antichrist, or this wicked ruler, will be a Roman tie of some sort, because it's the people of the coming commander, and we would know him as the Antichrist. Okay, so here the Antichrist is introduced, and he will make a binding covenant with many for a week. So the Antichrist is present in this 70th week, the time of tribulation, and he's the one that makes the binding covenant for a week. And for half the week, he will pause the sacrifice and the grain offerings. Destructive people will cause desolation on the pinnacle until it is complete, and that which has been decreed is poured out on the desolator. And so in the end of the tribulation period, God's going to take out the Antichrist, the desolator of the earth. And this is the ISV version, which, I love doing the King James version. But not only the language sometimes gets a little thick because we're not used to it, but even though it's more poetic, it's not quite as descriptive. And so, I've been using the ISV here a little bit just because it's a little bit more descriptive or discrete for us. But, the King James Version, if I'm doing a word study in the Bible, I'm using the King James Version. And I know the arguments that the King James only people make in terms of, it's the only version using the Textus Receptus that exalts the Lord correctly in all those places in the New Testament. So I get all those arguments, but for this purpose here, this was more descriptive. The Antichrist makes a binding covenant for a week. So there's the 7-year period. It's defined not by the rapture of the church, but by the Antichrist making this binding covenant. And so there, it's not the rapture. The Antichrist must be present to confirm the covenant. So we learn that right here. So let's go look at Revelation 6. And this is why people talk about, the Antichrist comes here at the first seal. Then I saw the Lamb open the first of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a loud voice, with a voice like thunder, "Go." And I looked, and there was a white horse, and a rider had a bow, and a victor's crown had been given to him. And he went out as a conqueror to conquer. And rider on the white horse, the first one. Antichrist can either mean against Christ, but in the Greek, antichristos can also mean in place of. And I think that's an apt description here, because when Jesus returns, the second coming to earth, Revelation 19, he's riding a white horse. So here's the usurper, the Antichrist, or at least the spirit of the Antichrist, coming to earth. And again, Revelation 6 is after Revelation 4. So if the Antichrist needs to be on the scene before the covenant is confirmed, he's showing up then here after the rapture, but we're going to have to figure out now, how long is he on the scene before the day of the Lord or the tribulation period begins? And so there's that gap that we're talking about. So the start, though, of the tribulation period has to do with confirming a covenant. And we'll see in a minute here now some arguments that point us down lower in Revelation 6. Matter of fact, probably at the sixth seal or post the sixth seal is when it starts. So let's get into this now. The fifth seal argument is the first one we're going to look at. And this one was brought up by a popular writer. His name is Bill Salas. And he's going to make this argument here that we see the souls of saints under the altar in heaven who've been executed for their witness to the Lord, asking how long until the judgment of those who slayed them was to occur. So let's look at that, Revelation 6, 9 and 10. When the Lamb opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered because of the word of God and the testimony they had given. They cried out in a loud voice, Holy and true sovereign, how long will it be before you judge and take revenge on those living on earth who shed our blood? And so Bill Salas wrote a book. I suppose I should have looked it up before this video, but he wrote a book last year about this time. And in part, he was trying to lay out the sequence of events that happen after the rapture of the church. And his argument ended up being the same, that the day of the Lord at least had to start after the fifth seal. And the reason why he got there is he said, if these saints under the altar are asking God how long until he judges and takes revenge on those living on earth who shed their blood, they wouldn't be asking if that judgment had already begun, right? And so we see all these seals, the four seals before it, with all these terrible things coming, and yet, the souls under the altar know that that isn't yet the judgment on the wicked of the earth. It's the precursor. That's his argument. And I thought that was a great argument that he made. And as a little personal nugget here we'll get to in a minute, the Lord had showed me something else similar to this fifth seal deal before Bill put his book out there. And I said, I was going to present something, but it was so speculative that I knew I was walking on thin ice, because no prophecy is a private interpretation. So I put it out there very speculative. And when he put out his book and started doing interviews, which is where I saw this, I thought, there it is. Somebody else is seeing the same thing from a totally different angle. Somebody else is seeing the same thing. I thought, wow, that's awesome. And so I did a little video recapping what Bill had been saying, and I snapshot the interview that he was in. And then Bill Salas turns around and grabs that video that I did and used it in an email blast promotion for his book. So it was kind of funny. I think he probably thought the same. At least somebody was lifting up what he was saying there, that there was this gap between the rapture and the beginning of the day of the Lord. So I was pretty fired up by that. I got to be honest there, saints, because you don't want to be out there with a private interpretation. So let's just take a look here now. So if these souls are in a thing, how long before you judge them? We have to look at what is that the purpose of the tribulation, and it is. Let's go look at Isaiah 2:12. Okay. For the Lord of the heavenly armies has reserved a time to oppose all who are proud and haughty, and the self-exalting they will be humbled. Now this is in the context of the day of the Lord. Okay, saints. So one of the purposes there to humble the proud, the haughty, to bring them down. Let's take a look at Isaiah 13:9 as well. Watch out, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to turn the entire inhabited earth into a desolation and to annihilate sinners from it. You see the judgment, right? Day of the Lord is judgment on the wicked of the earth. And so I think that's pretty clear. So, and the fifth seal then, if those saints in heaven who have been slaughtered for their testimony, coming to faith in Christ, if they're slaughtered for their testimony, saying how long until the judgment falls, it means the judgment hasn't started yet. So I think that's just a simple, good argument that Bill Salus came up with, and I really like it. Okay, now here's the one that I had before Bill Salus put out his book, and I think this one's real solid too. In the sixth seal, you get this reference, sun going black and moon to blood. And that's down here in 6:12. Then I saw a Lamb open the sixth seal, and there was a powerful earthquake, and the sun turned black as sackcloth made of hair, and the full moon turned as red as blood. And I got into this back when the blood moon tetrad thing was going on in 2014, 2015. Everybody was trying to figure out, is there blood moon references in the Bible, right? And so, no mystery there. You go look, and the obvious references are here in Revelation 6:12, Acts 2, and in Acts 2 it was Peter quoting Joel 2. There's other references, and we shouldn't mix these things up, when the sun and the moon are darkened. And you'll see that, and I believe it's in, I want to say Revelation 16 in the bowl judgments. It's just prior to the second coming. And that reference, the sun and the moon being darkened, is here in Isaiah, and it's there, and it's just before the day of the Lord ends. You have that phenomenon. But this one where the sun's darkened and the moon's to blood appears to all be consistent, and it sits right here in Revelation 6:12. And so let's just go back and take a look at the Acts 2 reference to figure out, so if it's here, let's see what it says in Acts 2. Peter quoting this now in 19 and 20. And I will display wonders in the sky above and signs in the earth below, blood, fire, clouds of smoke. The sun will become dark and the moon will turn to blood before the coming of the great and glorious day of the Lord. So you catch that? He's telling us what this sun going dark and moon to blood is a signal for. It's a signal before the coming of the glorious day of the Lord. Now, just from that, you can conclude that the day of the Lord then has to happen just after Revelation 6:12. I hope that makes sense. I think that's clear. Let's go take a look too in Joel 2, because Peter was quoting that. And the reason why this one caught my attention back during the blood moon stuff, the Mark Biltz and the book he put out and all that, was because this is Peter on the day of Pentecost. And Peter stands up and he says, you must understand something, pay close attention to my words. These men are not drunk, as you suppose, for it's only 9 in the morning. Rather, this is what's spoken of through Joel the prophet. In the last days, God said, I'll pour out my spirit on everyone. Your sons will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. I'll pour out my spirit on my slaves, men and women alike. That all happened, right? The spirit poured out on the day of Pentecost. Did this happen? I will show wonders in the I will display wonders in the sky above, signs on the earth blood, fire, clouds of smoke. Well, we weren't there, but there's no scriptural reference to that. The sun didn't become dark and the moon turned to blood. And so to me, that was just odd. Why was it's Peter quotes all this, makes sense because the Spirit poured out on the Israelites, on the Jewish first members of the church, but this didn't occur. And boy, was that ever puzzling for me. Why Peter continued to quote Joel through portions that didn't happen on that day? Then whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And I'll skip through the analysis that I did way back in the day, but I honestly think that yes, the church is raptured in Revelation 4 is pictured there, the rapture of the church. I think God is going to give this time of the opening of the seals and before the day of the Lord for the lukewarm church and the Gentiles who had heard about the rapture of the church that saw it now happen to come to him before the day of the Lord commences. I think Peter, through the Holy Spirit, was giving us a bookmarker. The people talk about the pause button being hit on the plan for the Jews at the day of Pentecost. The Spirit pouring out, boom, pause button hit. When does the button come back up? I think it's at the sixth seal here. And when they see the sun becoming dark and the moon turning to blood, that's right down there in the last seal, sixth seal, 12. What happens in the first verses of Revelation 7? The Spirit pours out on the 144 Jewish witnesses. You can see the pause button is a perfect bookmark between the Spirit first descending on the Jewish or the Israelite people on the day of Pentecost and the church age beginning. When does the pause button come up? I think Peter was giving us bookmarkers as to the end. So in this line of thinking that I did back, this is 3-4 years ago, yes, the church age, the church goes to heaven at the rapture. I think God is going to give the lukewarm Laodicean apostate church and other people that had been witnessed to in the Gentile world one last shot after they saw that miraculous sign of the church leaving to be a witness in the earth. And the end of the Gentile witness is, I think, why Peter quotes the rest of Joel here, is it's the bookmark to the completion of the church being the witness in the earth. When you get to Revelation 7, you see the Spirit pouring out on the 144,000 Israelite men, and they become the witness in the earth after that. So that's my argument, doing it partly from reason. But let's go to Joel 2:30 and 31 and just look at what Peter was quoting. I will display warnings in heaven and on earth, blood, fire, columns of smoke. See, Peter was quoting. The sun will be given over to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming great and terrifying day of the Lord. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be delivered, right? So that's the pattern. The day of the Lord begins, and then whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And that's what you see there in Revelation 7. So I think that's an interesting thing. We find out that the day of the Lord in this context happens just after the sun going dark and the moon turning to blood, which, let's just look. Revelation 6. There it is. Sun black as sackcloth, moon turning to blood. And now we're going to learn right at the end of the description of the sixth seal, the great day of wrath has come. Who is able to endure it? I think that's clear. That just tells you the day of the Lord is tied to the sixth seal completing, and then the 7-year tribulation period begins. So there's the first witness of the sixth seal. Here's the second one. the heavens roll up as a scroll. Now, this is one little nugget I got today, and it was only because I happened to be reading in the ISV version, which again was just a little bit more clear with the language than when I read with the King James version. And so it struck me today. I'm like, hey, look at that. Here's another way of looking at this that I had never seen before. Um, so let's just read here. Let's see, I got verse 10. But the day of the Lord, so get this, he's talking about the day of the Lord will come like a thief. And here's the part that was a little bit more descriptive. On that day, the heavens will disappear with a roaring sound. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be exposed. And I thought, wow, other translations of this, let's see what the ESV says. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar in the bodies. And so it's a little less specific. Was Peter just generally saying, here's what happens during the day of the Lord? And when I read it in the ISV, it was saying on that day. And that was helpful because Peter certainly was probably indicating the day of the Lord emanates from the heavens rolling up with, disappearing like a roaring sound and the elements being destroyed by fire. And you say, well, where does that happen? And it's the same argument I just got done making. That also is in the sixth seal. Look at verses 13 and 14. The stars in the sky fell to earth like a fig tree drops its fruit when it's shaken by a strong wind. The sky vanished like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island moved from its place. And so there's the second witness, 2 Peter 3:10. On that day, the heavens will roll up like a scroll. Which day are you talking about, Peter? Now, granted, Peter's writings and all that, that's pre-book of Revelations, 95, 96 AD. Peter's been dead for a while, so his writings was an insight that he must have gotten from the Lord directly, and also it was an Old Testament reference. But here it is, we're getting the order of it. This is in the sixth seal, isn't it? And so let's take a look now on the rest of this argument. Isaiah 34:4 and 8. And the title here on Isaiah is Judgment on the Nations. The valleys will be split, all the stars in the heaven will fall down, and the skies will be rolled up like a scroll. That's where Peter's getting it. And the starry host will fade away like leaves withering on a vine, the fruit withering on a fig tree. That's exactly what we got out of that Revelation 6 seal verse I just quoted you. Okay, and let's look at context here. Comes in verse 8. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for Zion's cause. And so there you go. There's an Old Testament reference saying the day of the Lord begins with the heavens rolling up like a scroll and the elements melting and the stars falling like figs from a tree. And I think, man, there you go. This is like yet another confirmation that the day of the Lord is indicated in that sixth seal, and then it proceeds with the Spirit pouring down on the Israelite people in Revelation 7. You can also pick up this notion in Isaiah 51, but it's a little sensitive to which version or translation you're using. Let's go to Isaiah 51:6. Lift up your eyes, you heavens, and look to earth beneath, and see who created these. Its inhabitants will die just like this, but my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never fail. And it's like, well, I don't see nothing there, but if you go to the ESV version, lift up your eyes to heaven and look at the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and those who will die in like manner. So there's the heavens will vanish like smoke. Seems to be a common reference here. And this is in the context of the Lord comforting Zion, that he's going to take vengeance during the day of the Lord. So positionally and in context, it fits if this is a good reading. And so I tagged that in there, but I realized that if you don't have the ESV version, you may not pick up this little phrase here, for the heavens will vanish like smoke. I think it might be sensitive to the translation of the base text being used. I didn't dig into that one further. And then here, my last argument is one that I just did the video on the other day. That's Jesus who's pouring out the wrath during the tribulation period. Now, you don't, the Lord of heavenly armies is a reference to Jesus in the Old Testament, and he's tied to the day of the Lord in the Old Testament. But this one hit me the other day. I was watching a video, somebody teaching through some passages in John 5, and it gets to verse 22, and it's this: for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son. And I went, wow. And one reason why that's sunk in with me is, what did we say that the tribulation period was about? It's the judgment on the wicked. It has to be Jesus pouring out the wrath of God. The judgment is coming from him. And the little insight I had then is, the thing that went ding, ding, ding in my mind was, there is a spot that describes Jesus pouring out his wrath, and it's right down here at the end again, at the sixth seal, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, who can stand? And so, I think we've got, 4 witnesses there to the day of the Lord begins at the end, or is signaled with the sixth seal, but it begins at the end of the sixth seal. And the tribulation period begins, and when it begins with the sealing of the Holy Spirit and the 144,000 Israelite men. And so it's a perfect book ending. The Spirit falls on the day of Pentecost on the Jewish people gathered, and it precedes then the time of God dealing with the Jewish nation, proceeds after the pause button is lifted at that sixth seal. The Spirit again falls on the Jewish Israelite men. So I hope that's a blessing, saints. I'm pretty fired up. The Lord gave me 2 little nuggets related to this in the span of a week. And, going back 3 or 4 years ago, this whole notion seemed really speculative. But if you think about it, there has to be a gap of some sort between the rapture and the day of the Lord beginning, because the Antichrist needs to be present, and the Antichrist isn't present until the first seal is open. And then from a practical standpoint, if he's present at the confirming of the covenant, nobody knows exactly how that's going to happen, but presumably he can't be signing the covenant literally as the church is going to heaven. There's a gap there logically, because he has to rise to power. And if you look at some of the other verses tied to the tribulation period, where he rules over the armies of earth, he's got to rise to power and put down a couple of the nations. You see that whole business with the 10 horns, and 3 are plucked up by the roots and all this type of thing. You see that in Daniel. So there's a spooling up period to get the Antichrist in charge and in power before the armies go out then and start conquering on his behalf. So there's a gap of time then between the rapture of the church and the day of the Lord actually beginning. And I think what the Lord gave us was the seals on the scroll all need to be open before then Jesus pours out the wrath, the day of the Lord begins. So I hope that's a blessing to you, saints, and keep looking up. It seems like it's really close.